The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 59th Day. The history of the Atamurunas people was notably similar to the one of the House of Tharsis. The old Taktanga narrated it to the lords of Tharsis with high details, but I, Dr. Setonal, will try to resume it with few words. The ancestors of the Atamurunas, and the language that they speak, came from the region of Skolesvig in the set of Denmark. In the 10th century, the kingdom of Skjoldland existed there, which had 8 centuries of antiquity, and had resisted the army Christians of Charlemagne 150 years before. Its population, of pure blood, still conserved the religion of Odin, or Aten, and had obtained to preserve the Stone of Venus, heritage of the White Atlandans. For those heresies, the Gullenes had decreed the sentence of extermination for the entire royal house. Contrarily to the House of Tharsis, the brave Vikings didn't hide the Stone of Venus, but they crimped it in the crown of their kings, situation that forced them, at least, to exhibit it in every ceremony of coronation, or to present the crown before each new territorial lord, which with they were infeuded. Nevertheless, such imprudent behavior, the people of Skjoldland achieved to maintain their freedom until the times of the King of Germany Henry I, the Fowler. In the 10th century, this king, who was a Hyperborean initiate as well, defeated the King of Denmark, Germondo, and conquered the Schleswig. According to his custom, he established a borderline mark in the region, and with that purpose named Tamagre King of Skjoldland, regardless of whether his subjects were Christians or not. But the German kingdom was Christian, and the Gullenes didn't delay to begin a campaign of agitation to force the conversion in mass of the Vikings, and forcing his king to give the instruments of the pagan cult within them the crown with the Stone of Venus. However, they didn't obtain anything in the life of Henry I. When the king died, in the year 936, he was succeeded by his son, Otto, who, even for being descendant of the legendary Witikind, by the matrilineal inheritance of Matilda, he was brainwashed by the work of his Benedictine Gallene instructors. Otto I wanted to imitate Charlemagne in everything, and he began being crowned king in Aachen by the Archbishop of Mentz, followed by numerous expeditions to Italy to know the popes, and his imperial investiture in Rome in 962. The strong relation between the German Church and the Empire, which will last until the extermination of the Hohenstaufen in 1250, it can be affirmed that it begins with the extraordinary concessions of Otto I. It is comprehensible then, that with such emperor, the fate of the small kingdom of Skjoldland, its die, was cast. In 965, the intrigues of the Gullenes make effect, and an expedition marches over the Schleswig, is composed by imperial troops at the command of the General Zerner, and they carry out the mission to convert the heathen kingdom to Christianity, or to destroy it, and, in any way, kidnap the royal crown. This time, there is no salvation for the Vikings, and is in this way that King Colman proposed them to abandon such country that will fall soon in power of the demons. Odin guided our grandfathers, and gave them these lands, and he commands us now to leave towards another kingdom beyond the seas. The 70% of the population accepted the offer, and sailed in 220 drakers, but, who remained, were murdered by the angry evangelizers. The numerous fleets crossed the Tenbrus Sea, and reached to the Gulf of Mexico. There, the Celtic civilization was flourishing, who received the Vikings as sons of the gods, it means, as the offspring of the White Atlandans. The House of Skjold was as old as the one of Tharsis. But, in the familiar mission both lineages differed notably. Instead of a cold fire in the here, the lords of Skjold had to profundize in the secret of the magical agriculture, until the obtaining the essence of the cereal. Incorporated in the pure blood, such essence would cause the precipitation of a seed of stone in the heart of the initiates. the White Atlantans had advised them the formation of a permanent body of Noros and Rheas, whose work would be the contemplation of the stone of Venus, and awaiting for the appearance of the lithic sign of the Valhalla. And when it takes place, it would be the moment to travel towards the abode of gods. And the sign has appeared, a few days after the attack of Scotland. In the stone of Venus, of Rhea, achieved to see a megalithic scenery of the shores of an enormous lake. Such place, said the loyal gods, was located beyond the Tenbrus Sea. But, there, they should go, due to, a great empire, would be the house of Scotland, by the will of the gods. And for this reason they sailed in the 220 drakes. In sum, the house of Scotland constituted a family of Hyperborean initiates, and must not result strange that, at their departure, King Coleman as his queen, and numerous Noros and Rheas, were men of stone. Even though they had imposed without problems over the Toltecs, and had contributed profoundly in the improvement of the civilization, 10 years later, the people of Coleman continued their journey to the south, remaining with the Toltecs, those who had committed the racial sin of mating with them. They would navigate to Venezuela. Thereupon, they would march towards the west, crossing Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador, and they would reach to Quito, thence they would sail again towards the south. They would disembark in Tacna, and would go up the mountains of the east, until the plateau of Tiahuanaco, and the Lake Titicaca. That was the place that the stone of Venus indicated. In Tiahuanaco, the people of Scotland found a cyclopean half-built city of stone, some type of workshop of the White Atlantans. Among the ruins, they edified a population that would be the head of an empire. And in the Isle of the Sun, they erected a temple to the local deity, due to, they had presented themselves to the Collas, Amar, and other Indians, as sons of the Sunday. The Viking Empire of Tiahuanaco had prospered and extended until the 14th century, when the second part of the racial drama of the House of Scotland occurred. In such century, in fact, the people of Scotland, who were already called Timuronas, due to their white skin and predilection for the cool moon, had dominated all the Indians' populations, who dwelled in the surroundings. Only one of them resisted, and not by their own merits, but owing to the Timuronas, doubted between to know them free and far, or submit them to the vassalage having to treat with them. They were the Digatas, and the apprehension of the Vikings proceeded from a rejection almost epidermic, essential to the custom and culture of them. The case was that, even if the mass of Indians belonged effectively to the American ethnicities, the noble and priestly lineage that reigned them had Mediterranean origin, or, more precisely, it came from Middle East. In the museums of Santiago del Estero, Catamarca, Salta, Tucumán, or Tilcara, can be seen today hundreds of potteries, written in Aramaic and Hebrew, that confirm such affirmation. The Digata nobility flaunted the most rancid Hebrew ancestry, and their priests were considered as the most jealous defenders of the cultural pact and the sacrifice one. They professed a mortal hate against the Vikings, and they lived harassing permanently the frontiers of the empire. But they had been always controlled, at least until the fatidical year of 1315. In that year, a general uprising of Digatas tribes was produced from the Corredor de Jaca, until Atacama, in Chile, without any justifiable motive, by part of the empire. The news indicated that the great Kekikeri had received the visit of two envoys of God, the one, Behj, and Burchaj, who incitated them to the war against Tiahuanaco. They assured the victory, because the Digatas, they said, belonged to the people chosen by the land. They could not lose. Motivated thereby, the ferocious indigents advanced irresistibly upon the limits of the empire, and besieged in Tiahuanaco. The Vikings, finally, searched shelter in the Isle of the Sun, while the initiated Admironas, it means, the men of stone, entered in the secret Atlantean cavern, in the Isle of the Moon, Coati. nothing could do the Vikings against the high strategy applied by the demons Bej and Berthaj, who guided the Digatas, and they ended falling in the fence that the enemy closed around the Isle of the Sunday. Taking thousands as prisoners, the people of Skeoldland went patiently beheaded, one by one in hands of the Hebrew Digatas priests. In this part of the narration the Atamuruna Tataranga signalized a runic relief in the wall and asked, Melody, Quiblin, what represent these words for you? Because the Digatas priests, each time that they beheaded a prisoner, from ear to ear, seeking to make that the blood fall into the lake, screamed, for Melody, for Quiblin. Our ancestors wrote with runes such names, which for them had no sense, because they wanted that someday their offspring could clarify the enigma. The men of stone remained in silent, nailed in their sights. But, they thought, how terrible is the illusion of the great deceit. How different is the same reality seen from another perspective. That 1315 had been a good year for the house of Tharsis. The Lord of Venus came, and he approved all the actions deployed against plans of the wide fraternity. The action of the house of Tharsis and the Circulus Demonicanis caused the destruction of order of the temple, and with them, with the stake of Jacques de Melly, the danger of the universal synarchy, and the chosen people disappeared for the moment. And the advent of Quiblin would delay in 180 years. And in that year, the Valentinians settled down in Tuds. Definitely, 1315 was a year of celebration that the lords of Tharsis still remembered with sympathy. It was even said that it was one of the best years in the history of the house of Tharsis. And now they comprehended that for their brothers of Skeoldland, that was a disastrous day, the worst of their history. The enemy took then an atrocious vengeance. They tried to exterminate their lineage, in reprisal for the destruction of the order of the temple. For that reason, they said after every execution, for Melody, for Quiblin. Imitating to Charles of Tharsis, when he said to the Galeen, who were going to die, in the stakes of sense. For Neptune, and the blood of Tharsis. Damn Galeens, damn members of the chosen people, damn Biray, and Bishar. A new account to be paid in the final battle. I will continue with the summarized narration, Dr. Signal. I will just add that, thenceforth, 1315 would be considered a year of bereavement for the house of Tharsis. The men of stone of the lineage of Skeold remained sheltered in the Isle of the Moon during 35 years, before they dared to realize a new strategic action. In that period, the surveillance of the Hebrew Indians was constant over the Lake Titicaca, because numerous local legends told about caverns and tunnels that the White Atlantans built thousands of years ago. They suspected that some Atamurunas could be hidden there. However, the Varuns of Neptune constituted a formidable obstacle, even for the power of the demons Bej and Berthaj, beings who lacked of uncuted spirit. And nobody except for the Hyperrune initiates would see the Atamurunas again. Really, the survivors were very few, although they were accompanied by a major number of the mestizo race members, to which the Amaltus of the Black Bonnet belonged. That race had been formed by the mix of the Viking blood and the Indians, who lived in Tiwanaku, at the arrival of King Coleman. Nevertheless, the aforementioned miscegenation, the Vikings, had always tried to conserve the pure blood, and they imposed a law by which were only nobles, those who were offspring of the lineage of Skeold. Thereby, the belonging to the nobility demanded the marriage between members of the conqueror race. The mestizos, even if they were relatives of the Vikings, remained excluded from the nobility, but not from the right to participate from the mystery of the pure blood. It means, the mestizos could access to the Hyperborean initiation faculty that ended dividing them in initiates. It means, Amaltus of the Black Bonnet, and Quaranas, that's to say, moon men, or people of the moon. The survivors of the Digatar slaughter were composed by a dozen of Atamurunas and 100 Quaranas. When they believed that the danger diminished, 35 years later the Atamarunas decided to occupy the path of the gods, an ancient route of the Atlantean Empire, that started in Tiwanaku, and ended in Caribbean Sea. In a first stage, they traveled through the secret path, towards Cusco, where existed a lateral exit. Thereupon, they decided to send 2 Atamarunas initiates, to create a new royal lineage, in the populations of the region of Cusco, who had been vassals of the Vikings of Tiwanaku for centuries. One of the initiates was the Inga Manco Epig, and the other, his Hyperborean couple, his wife and sister, Mama Tekla. Both realized their mission, and founded a lineage that lasted until the end of the Inga Empire, and to which the Emperor Atahualpa belonged, the Inga murdered by Pizarro. However, even by the effectuated efforts, even if the offspring of Manco Cepig only married amongst them, nothing could do the Ingas of Cusco, to prevent the degradation of the pure blood. In just 1 century, no initiates emerged from the royal family, and the Ingas depended of the Amautas of the Black Bonnet, to any esoteric office. But, the fall of the people of Cusco not ended there. The territorial expansion of the empire put them in contact with populations of the cultural pact, and they suffered the influence of priests, who transformed the mystery of Viracocha, or Natan, in a mere cult to the creator god. Then, appeared other Amautas, that is to say, priests, who usurped the function of the Hyperborean initiates. The greatest damage, in this sense, was produced by the arrival in the 14th century, of a group of Catholic missionaries coming from Brazil, where they disembarked after crossing the Atlantic Ocean. They were led by a priest of strong personality, to whom the Indians of Paraguay gave the name of Pazum, or Pachume, legendary name, that the posterior Jesuits of the missions identified with the apostle Saint Thomas or Saint Tome. The Incas, instead, accepted his preach, and they equated with their Gotanupa, one of the aspects of Viracocha. The accurate measures that he took to destroy the religion of the Atamarunas indicated that they had not arrived to Cusco randomly, but that he was an envoy of the wide fraternity. Such priest achieved to impose the cult to the cross, the crucified, to the Mother of God, and the Trinity of God, beliefs that were still maintained more or less deformed in the times of the Spaniard conquest. This was undoubtedly disastrous for the spiritual vitality of the Incas, but the greatest one came from the insertion of the ritual sacrifice, and the change of meaning of the Apachfeta. In the age of the Empire of Tiwanaku, an Atamaruna called Sancharuca taught to the Indians a variant of the cult of the cold fire. In such cult, the stones of the Apachfeta represented the great ancestors, Okakila Apachfeta, and a special boulder was the cold stone, the stone possessor of the sign of Waingie, or sign of the death. The Rumi Waingie was also in the heart of man, in the soul, and to it remained chained the uncuttered spirit. For this reason, in the Takanka ceremony, when spitting in the Aplakui, a bag with leaves of the coca plant, on the Rumi Waingie, was expressed the desire of separation from the anemic and the spiritual, the transference of the anemic part to the stone. But, above all, the Apachfeta was an altar, a high place, consecrated to the mother of Natan, the goddess Emma, the Virgin of Agartha, the goddess who gave the seed of the cereal to men, that's to say, the goddess that the Indians knew as Pachamama. When the Indian transitated through a path, and reached to a crossing, or crossroads, he deposited a stone in the Apachfeta, and released his Ekliyaki of coca, or he just put a wet pebble with saliva. The Pachamama then killed his tiredness, destroyed his fatigue, removed the pain, that what is own of the human condition, that is to say, liberated the spirit from the anemic or animal nature, and oriented the journeyman in the labyrinth of the illusion that reflected the crossroads. But when the Indian heard the varooms of Natan, the voice of Viracocha, wherever he could be, he felt fulminated, and it was said that he was Eponado. That was the moment to build an altar to the Pachamama, and right there the stones of the Apachfeta were deposited. As I said, the doctrine of Pesum, altered the strategic meaning of the Apache Feta, coinciding in this with the Hebrew Digatas, who had introduced similar modifications in the conquered territories to the Atamurunas. The change consisted in the disturbance of the cult of the cold fire into the cult of the warm fire, and to identify the Pachamama with the Great Mother Bina. Thus, it was converted, at the style of the Roman decadence, the Apache Feta, in an altar of layers gods, or of a supreme god, creator of the world, represented by the warm fire, the creator fire, which never extinguishes, the solar lecus, the Sunday, and over the Apache Feta, reigned now, a Bina Pachamama, Mother Earth, Shakti, creator matrix of things, goddess of love, to whom was convenient to make sacrifices for her intervention before his husband, the Creator One. Thenceforth the Apache Feta lost its strategic character and orientator towards the origin, and it was for the Incas of Cusco an object of the cultural pact, an instrument of idolatry of the priests of the wide fraternity, the Nuamautas. Such process of spiritual decadence resulted catastrophic for the Atamurunas of the late Titicaca, which neither achieved to preserve the pure blood, and they were facing day to day with the racial extinction. Their presence was now reduced to the ambit of the path of the gods, which they ended occupying completely, and the city of the moon, in the secret cavern of Isle of the Moon. Almost never they were visible to the dwellers of the Empire of Cusco, except to transmit some esoteric information to the Incas, but their apparitions were feared, because they were considered announcer of ills, predictors of disasters, etc. Their envoys were the Amautas of the Black Bonnet, and they never appeared too much at the sight of the inhabitants neither, and inspired identical terror. It is convenient to clarify, Dr. Setonal, that once occupied the path of the gods, it was only utilized for traveling, by the Amautas of the Black Bonnet. The Atamurunas employed instead, a subterraneous path, which crossed the Andes from one extreme to the other, and it had the same trace of the path of the gods. It means that it was extended behind it. There were vertical secret exits that communicated the path of the gods with the tunnel of the Andes, where appeared the mysterious Atamurunas. And, according to what the Incas legends affirmed, such tunnel, constructed by the White Atlantans, possessed stone vehicles that allowed the traveling at fantastic speeds. Finally, 2 years before the arrival of Francisco Pizarro to Cajamarca, the situation of the Atamurunas became desperate. They only disposed of the Princess Quia to maintain the matrilineal succession of the lineage, but they didn't achieve to determine her marriage, because the 12 Atamurunas alive were all very close relatives, and whose parents and grandparents had been also cousins and brothers amongst themselves. Any relationship with them would degrade with security that pure blood would cause the degeneration of the offspring. Was in these circumstances, the Noyos observed a lithic signal in the stone of Venus, and received the visit of the god Cuff. The crown of the king Colmen rested since centuries ago on an altar of stone with form of straight circular site. The extremes of the exterior arch were united with an interior arch in relief, parallel to the first, to symbolize the image of the waning moon, and over that half-moon was placed the sacred crown, with the stone of Venus facing the circular edge. The Noyos, commonly seated before the crown, aligning the site with stone of Venus, and the vertex of the straight angle of the altar. Opposed to what happened with the lords of Tharsis, perhaps, due to the endogamy, the 12 Atamurunas Noyos were capable to project the lithic signal in the stone of Venus. Thenceforth, they recognized a megalithic scenery that, even though it was located at thousands of kilometers from the Lake Titicaca, it not implied maritime routes, and Sylvan as the start, by the Spaniard initiates. What was seen, indeed, was a replica at the rocks of the Sternstein of the sacred mountain of the Germans, situated in Forest Tobergrunwald. Really, there are various Sternsteiner around the world, everyone similar to the one of Germany, and all the possessors of the runes of Nevton. The one which was observed in the stone of the Valhalla, of the crown of the king Colman, was located near to the Corrado of Humahuaca, in the actual territory of Argentina, in a place that today is called VILLCA, at the feet of the hill Calabo. About it, the Atamurunas had no doubts. What was missing to determine was, what meant that image? Would they have to travel towards the Xtastena of Jujuy? It could be near. According to what the familiar tradition affirmed, existed a secret entrance, which guided to the Valhalla, or Kataiwa, previous pass through the door of the south. The answers were offered by God Cuff,